Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Racing Insiders podcast. This is episode 173 today on November 20th, 2023. And I have a special announcement and a special guest to introduce to you tonight. You know, after the podcast last week, it was really great sitting here with my brother Jimmy Schultz, and having him on the podcast. And so afterwards we talked, and he knows so many more racing stories than I do. And so just to kind of switch things up on the podcast, I am bringing Jimmy on as a co-host. So he'll be joining us tonight. And our special guest for this evening is someone I've known him for several years. I'm actually one of his dealers, and it was really cool. Got to see him inducted into the Iowa Racing Hall of Fame just a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago. And that is Fast Shafts of Pat Fagen. And so I want to welcome everybody to the stage here, and welcome Pat, welcome to the show, and welcome Jimmy as a co-host. So Pat, kick things off for us. Tell us a little bit how it felt to be inducted into the Iowa Racing Hall of Fame.
It's one of those things that just doesn't quite sink in. I've been in my lifestyle for 30 plus years and just done what I do. And, I've grown a little business that started from nothing to what Fast Shafts is today. And it's just like I was speaking with you earlier, I had a nice little piece out for me to talk about up there, but I realized that most everybody that was getting up there talking, they were short and sweet and brief, so I kind of froze and I was short and brief. So, but I'm really not even sure it's still settled in, because as I was just up in Syracuse, New York, and I had a handful of people there in New York come by and congratulate me for being inducted into the Hall of Fame, which, it's an honor. It's a very humbling experience, and I'm really not sure that I'm worthy of it, but I guess somebody thought I was, or some people thought I was. So here I am. I'm a Hall of Famer. So it's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah, and I have the proof right here. So there's the Hall of Fame program right there,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
open it up, and
yeah,
there you are, right there. Make sure
yeah,
it's on the screen for anybody who's just
yeah,
listening. I'm just showing a picture in the program. Well, I
yeah.
learned from this that you have a 40-year plus racing career. I didn't actually know you raced. I only knew you as a manufacturer.
Yeah.
What did you race?
Well, I started back in probably the middle to late 70s when I worked for Spagnuolo, who was from Des Moines, Iowa, car dealer, and he was a good friend of Jack Housby. And between Jack Housby and Tommy Spagnuolo, they had racers come through. Tommy's business, Joe Merrifield, Ramo Stott, Dave Chase, and that's how I actually met Robert Lawton from the Boone Speedway. Was back in the 70s, and so Tommy Spagnuolo, we were at some enduro thing at the Iowa State Fair Speedway, and we left there, and he said, "I want to build one of those cars." We got an old 1973 Plymouth Duster with a little 6-cylinder automatic in it, and we jazzed it all up and made an enduro car out of it. And Tommy went out and did it, and next week he goes, "I want you to drive this, Pat." So I started driving enduro cars, and then when I got into the salvage business in 1982, I started fooling around with go-karts. And, I got pretty good at the go-karts, and most go-kart races were in Iowa here. They were held at the Iowa State Fair, Iowa State grounds, inside of a little barn. And, there was a lot of circle track dirt racers that were there, so I got to rubbing elbows with all the dirt racers, and salvage yard days. That's how I promoted the salvage yard. I would just let a racer come in. I just say, "Hey, go out back, get what you need, take whatever part you need," because back in the 80s, most race cars were salvage yard parts. And so, before I know it, I got my Pat Fagen Champagne Auto Salvage name on about 59 race cars in the state of Iowa. So then I started sponsoring a young man, and we actually had the first Bob Harris house car, the Harris Auto Racing when Bob was up in Independence, Iowa, many moons ago. And so after that little thing was over, I ran into an old engine builder up in Polk City, Iowa. His name was John Harmon, and John saw me in the go-karts, and he goes, "I want to build you a stock car." So he built me a stock car, and we raced at the Iowa State Fair Speedway. And he goes, "You gotta go to Boone." He said, "I'm gonna." And so he built another one, and so I had two stock cars, and shoot, back in the late '80s, all I had to do was show up with my driving suit. I had a race car, so it was a good time. And John built a lot of motors for a lot of racers throughout the country. He built them for Ryan, who's well in Iowa. He's Ryan Gustin's father. He built them for Mark Elliott, who was the founder of Terminator Chassis. The names go on and on and on. Then I got uh, out of the stock cars, and John and I put together a modified. We bought a Harris mod, and I got claimed one night, and we won't go into that story, but about the time I got claimed was when my drive shaft business was going strong, and my agreement with John was if I got claimed, I had to go claim another motor. So I just didn't feel good about racing with my customers and claiming their motor. So we got that. I think in the early 2000s, maybe late 2000, 2008, 2009, a bunch of us business guys in Des Moines decided we wanted to do something outside the IMCA world. And so we put together a little truck series, the Dirt Truck Racing Association. So, and basically a dirt truck is a stock car with a truck body. So I raced that. I'm pretty sure it was 2008, 2009. Maybe it was probably before that, because I think I raced like 10 years. And I was happy. I had fun. I was a low budget racer. One of the most fun nights I ever had was I passed Carl Moyer at the State Fair Speedway and coming out of turn number 4, and I passed him for the checkered flag, and I went into turn number 1 to slow down to pull into the infield so they could tech us, and I got hit behind, and what the heck was that? So I pulled inside, and Carl Moyer come over, and he goes, "God darn it, Pat." He said, "I am so sorry. I ran into you. I thought it was a white flag." And I goes, "Are you kidding me?" And um, I grabbed him, and Carl was a pretty hefty boy. I grabbed him and hugged him and lifted him off the ground. I goes, "Carl, it doesn't matter to me." I said, "You could hit me, you could roll me, catch me if I don't care. I just beat your ass." So that that was probably one of the most, and I would win, once or twice a year, and then in one of his trucks, I actually won 3 races that year, and uh, yeah, it was fun. And then I think it was about May of 2018. I was in a heat race, and I knew Brett Moyer, Carl's son, was behind me, and I did not want him to pass me. So I was driving for everything, and the right lower control arm broke, and I hit the wall doing about 80 mile an hour. And so I sat back and looked at the truck, and the very next year, because they had put me on the board of this little truck series, and the very next year we were going to implement the 604 crate motor that everybody had to run. And I looked at the truck, and I thought, I'm going to take about $3,000, and I'm going to have to spend $6,000-7,000 to put a crate motor. I said, I think I better concentrate on my business. It's probably one of the best things I did. I mean, I had a lot of fun racing. I lot of people. It gave me that hands-on experience, and it made some of the things that I was telling racers more viable, that actually understood. And so in the early 2000s, I started videoing race cars underneath suspensions. I got a lot of really, really cool videos. I have to share them with you someday. But one of the greatest things is I actually videoed a Power Glide transmission exploding under a Webster City Speedway. So I mean, it's really, really cool. So
Ooh,
So yeah,
yeah. I'll have to see
I've
that
raced.
footage.
I've been at racetracks. I've been under race cars. I've helped. You know, one of my favorite stories about Steve Arpin was when Steve Arpin first came to the United States, and probably about 20 years ago. Me and a buddy of mine walked through the Memphis Speedway pits, and right after hot laps, I walked by, and this guy was loading his car up in this big, beautiful orange hauler, and I goes, "What are you guys doing?" He goes, "Well, we blew the motor, and you came all the way from Canada, and you don't have an extra motor." He goes, "Well, there's only two of us." I said, "Get that thing out here. We'll change it." And so we roll the car out. We get out, and we get it changed. I told Steve to get in the car and get his belts on. I dropped the distributor in. I'm setting the timing up, and we're warming the motor up, and it starts valve covers. So I took my socks off and put them over the valve covers, to kind of calm down some of the smoke. And Steve said, "You can't do that." I go, "Yes, I can. They're my socks." So from that, Steve and I have been very, very close friends. So yeah, I've been around racing. I've actually raced, and I've spent many, many hours working on race cars. So
That's
That's
all.
quite, yeah. And do you have a question, Jimmy? You can do a follow-up.
I have a question about fast shaft. I mean, from the technical side of things, I'm assuming when you started, or you can just tell us how you started fast shafts. I'm assuming you started with steel drive shafts.
actually, I started building drive axles for front drive cars,
Okay.
and that's where the name Axle Exchange came from. In 1992, June of 1992, I started that company. I sold my 1966 or 63 Galaxy 500 convertible for $6,000, and I went out and I bought $6,000 worth of front wheel drive axles, and I started going around town to everybody that had a hoist in town, and started handing out business cards. And next thing you know, I had to hire my older brother to be a delivery. We were delivering axles to everybody in town, rebuilt CV drive axles, because in the early 90s, that was the thing. I mean, a lot of front wheel drive cars were starting to have failure problems, and
Oh yeah.
and and I think I was still involved in racing then, and I think it was Todd Shute. He goes, "You need to start drive tests." And there's a legend in Iowa, Dave Farron. I'm sure you've probably heard that name.
Okay, I have a question about Dave Farron here in a minute. Okay, we'll have to. Dave.
He was building drive shafts, on the floor of his garage. And another good example was another inductee this year was Danny Wallace. I mean, Danny Wallace was drive shafts on the floor of the garage. And that's about the time things were changing from a 2-link system to a 3-link system, and shit was starting to move around underneath these race cars, and we were having. So I through one of my jobs, I mean, back up a little bit. In 1989, I left my salvage yard and I went to work for a drive company called Certified. So I had met a lot of people in the United States and Alaska and Canada and Australia that I sold drive shaft components to. Well, so when I left that company and I started my own company, one of my relationships from California stuck, and his name was Leon Iddings from Lee's Drive Shaft in Ignacio, California, and he invited me out because I was thinking about building drive shafts, Leon. So he invited me out, and I spent a whole month out there with him. Learning how to build drive shafts in the 90s, late 92, early 93. And he had this great big, huge lathe. I mean, he would build drive shafts on a lathe, but he would also current drive shaft balancer that he was balancing them on. And he goes, Patty said, I'd like to give you that lathe. I goes, Leon, you just can't give me that lathe. He goes, yeah, you can have it. I goes, are you kidding me? He goes, no, but you got to figure out how to get it home. This thing weighs, 3,000 pounds. So I got hooked up with a trucking company, and cost me $500 to get this lathe from California. So, but anyway, Todd, he started driving, I think, stock cars then, and and so he was probably one of my first customers, and I started lightening up Ford 9-inch yokes because a lot of the Ford 9-inch yokes they were out of balance. They were poor castings from the get go, and and uh, Todd Schutz, I built him a dry shaft, and I'd gone to Wisconsin to buy a dry shaft balancer. I bought it from a company in California called Powertrain Industries, but they were built in Wisconsin, and I was at the bit to get this balance. I just went up and got it myself rather than fooling around with them sending it to me. So uh, I built a dry shaft for Todd, and got this thing vibrating bad. I had the same problem I've always had, and so I rebalanced the dry shaft and put it back in, and still had a vibration. So he goes, "Bring me the car." So I had a hoist, and we put it up on the hoist. And notice this 9-inch yoke. I mean, it was just wobbling as it's turning. So I took the yoke off the car and I put it in the lathe, and I cut about 3 pounds out of this yoke, but I made it true. And we put it back in, and that fixed it. And that was kind of the beginning of the fast shaft name. Todd, he kept telling me, "God, this thing is fast," and I everything was just kind of history after that. I mean, I could blabber on about the history of my company for hours. So.
Well, we got it all the time. It's Kate's podcast, but she said, "But it's not my time, so I can waste all her time that I want." So
Yeah,
I am very curious, though. I will get to Dave. Let me ask about Dave Farron then. So wasn't he like number 3 modified?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So when I was a kid, now, and Dad didn't race at Marshalltown that much, but every now and again he would go to Marshalltown, and I remember he would go there, and there was this, and Dave was winning all these races down there.
Yeah.
But it seemed like he blew his motor up every time. And this is, no lie, I'm not making it up. He would like go into turn 3, and then all of a sudden it would blow up and explode. It would seem, and then he'd cross the finish line and whatever. And this is when IMCA was $350 for a claim, right?
Right.
Well, from what I gather, didn't he have a little like bucket in his in the air cleaner above the carburetor where he had a little cable on it? So he would when he would come on the last lap, he would dump oil into the carburetor. So it would smoke like crazy, and everybody would think he blew the motor up, but he'd win the race. Am I making that up?
I'm not going to give you any verification on that. Okay.
What a cool story. I mean, that was like, we're talking like, gosh, I mean, how long ago was that? 35 years ago? You know, but like, that was pretty clever. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah. I started experimenting with dry shafts, and this was the modifieds were in the stage, and they were just starting to go to the 3-link. And I come up with this idea because I worked on several early drive shafts, and the drive shaft tube was 1.25 inches outside diameter. So I thought, my God, if this works in a Jeep, it's got to work in a race car. So I started a drive shaft. Granted, I used the best tubing I could. I got 1.25 inch, 1/8 inch wall chromoly tubing, and I started building drive shafts. And so Wayne, Dave, I tried to go to him and say, "Hey, you need one of these, put it in." He goes, "We got such a small tire." He goes, "I don't need any more power to the wheels. It'll never hook up. It'll never hook up." So then Wayne Larson from Ames, he had a handful of different drivers driving for him. So I had given Wayne a couple of them, and they were working. I mean, so it traveled fast that I had this little 1.25 inch baby bone drive shaft, and it worked real well. And then a gentleman from the middle of Nebraska started having another drive shaft company build these drive shafts for him. And at a big event in Nebraska, they started throwing these drive shafts out. They started breaking. Well, the reason they were breaking was they were just standard 1020 steel drive shafts. They weren't the 41 chromoly. And So IMCA called me immediately and said, Pat, you can't build that drive shaft no more. And I goes, what do you mean I can't build it? He goes, well, we're just having too many problems. People are throwing them out, and we're afraid somebody's going to hurt them. And I goes, well, it's not my drive shaft. He goes, well, how are we supposed to police that? I goes, well, okay, you got me. So IMCA kind of, at that time, they rules that the drive shaft for the IMC modified had to be a minimum diameter of 2 inch. But, you know, once Wayne Larson started using it, and then Dave Farron got wind of it, he goes, I got to have shafts, you know. So I did finally get one in Wayne's car. So, or
That's fun. So
in Dave
my
Farron's
question
car.
is,
So.
how did you go from the steel aluminum drive shaft to carbon? I mean, it's a totally different manufacturing process, and I would love to know how you were able to tackle that.
I started buying drive shafts from another supplier in the deep southeast, and I'm not going to name any names. I'm just not that guy, but and he was giving me a good deal. And I had a customer in Illinois call me. He goes, "Hey, I got a lot of horsepower. I want one of them carbon fiber drive shafts." I go, "Okay." So I sold it, and about a week later, he back and says, "Hey, Pat, the end twisted out. You know, the glue didn't hold." So I said, "All right, send it back to me. I'll get it fixed." So I sent it back to the guy in the deep southeast, and to me, and I sent it back to my customer. Sure enough, the same problem happened again. So about the fourth time, my supplier in deep southeast charged me. I goes, "You can't do that. It's not my problem. Why? How can you charge me when it's not my problem?" And I think that was about 2010, and I think that forced me to figure out how to do it on my own. And so we started with a company that built carbon fiber tubes in Wisconsin, and things were going real good. We built a lot of dry. I think we built like in 2012. I think I built 5 carbon fibers. You know, the next, you know, in 2013, I built like 150, and then in 2015, I had me and the supplier in Wisconsin got crossed disagreement, and I had just given my supplier in Wisconsin a blanket order for the whole year of 2015. Send me this much tubing. That way I don't have to order it and call you and get in panic orders, you know. So just send me this much every month, and I know I got it. You know I need it. We're all happy. Well, my supplier decided to set up another individual in my area, and it was in the middle of 2015. I goes, "Hey, why are you going to?" Because, you know, there's a reason General Motors puts one Chevrolet dealership in a small town, and that's all they let in that small town, is so that GM can support that dealer. I said, "Can you support me at all?" They said, "No, sorry, we got to sell to him." So I said, "Okay, no problem. Well, I'm going to honor my gentleman's agreement. I'm my blanket order for." And come January next year, I went with another company, ACPT, in California. And truth be known, ACPT was probably the grandfather of the carbon fiber drive shaft. They were building carbon fiber drive shafts, you know, 20 years ago for Scott Bloomquist. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that was their guy, Scott Bloomquist. I mean, that's part of the whole thing. And they grew in the aeronautical world and the military world. And why they continue to fool with me, I have no idea, because, you know, you have Grant. We're probably going to build 1,900 carbon fiber drive shafts in a year, and granted, that's a pretty good chunk of money for them. But I got to think the the astronaut world, you know, is a lot more than me. But that's kind of how we got into it, and we've made some mistakes along the way. But we I've always had in the back of my mind that I need to build a good product for a company or an individual, because if I'm going to walk around racetracks, and that's what I want to do, is have somebody hit upside the head with a drive shaft that failed, you know, especially on a 2,000 to win racetrack, and you know they had my drive shaft fail them on the last lap. You know, that really upsets people. So yeah, that's kind of how we got into the carbon fiber business, and I think we have a very, very low failure rate. I mean, I don't I don't think I've ever heard from you, Kate, on a failure of one of the drive shafts you bought from us. So,
No, the only failure is wrong measurements.
or yeah, self induced failures. Yeah.
That's it. But no failures. No. And you've always
So
done a great job of taking care of
so
my
yeah.
customers as well.
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, like we talked about earlier, I've been keeping track of sales history now since 2012, and I know what's popular. And as the economy tightens up, we're gonna quit buying spare parts, and they'll squeeze every bit of life out of the part they have. But when that thing fails, they want it right now, and I've learned that. And I've learned people don't call me because they call me because they need something, and it's up to me as a business person to make sure they get it in a timely fashion. And I think that's what kept us ahead of a lot of our competition. That you know I've got 4, 5, 6 of just about every measurement for every class, whether it's a dirt modified, whether it's a crate late model, or whether it's a full blown. I've got drive on the shelf that I can send out that day. So.
Yeah, and I've seen that. I've seen that firsthand for sure. And we have some people here who have left some comments. And anybody who's watching us live, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, and if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to drop them into the comments. And I'm just going to go down the line here. And our first commenter, of course, is Scott from California. He says, "Happy Monday from California." So happy Monday to you, Scott. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, yeah.
And Darren is here. Says, "Hi, hey, Kate and all." So, hey, Darren. Our podcast producer, Tori, is here saying, "Hey, y'all." I can't go. I don't have that good of a Southern accent. I try sometimes. And Chris Cheek is Chris Cheek Racing is here saying good evening.
Yeah,
Darren is commenting that great story. You loved you guys talking about the Dave Farron and all of that was pretty cool. And he says, this is good stuff. I see Bob Abbott is here. And he's the inventor of the tire spinner. Oh, and Neil is
yeah.
here from Hooker Harness. Says, "Oh, Pat."
Oh, save.
Oh, and Shane is here saying, Wayne Larson ran the V6s and kicked everyone's ass. Is
Yes, he
what?
did. Yeah, yeah. It was the loudest sounding race car on the racetrack. I mean, it really had a sound of its own. It almost sounded like a John Deere tractor out there on the racetrack. It was really cool. So yeah, Wayne got involved in a couple of NASCAR teams, and because I think some of the lower level NASCAR teams were running V6s and some of the asphalt cars, and he really opened a lot of eyes. So
Yeah, there was that guy. He was a number 3 car too, and I can't remember his name, but down in like Alabama and that, where he was running the V6s like at Talladega short track, if I'm remembering correctly, and he won a whole bunch of races with
yeah,
the V6 thing before they kind of took that over. But I remember Wayne Larson when I was a kid, where I think Wayne to me was like kind of like he's the one that kind of took the modified racing from like here to here. Like
yeah,
his
yeah,
stuff, like he would unload, and I always wondered, why does that guy not run late model? I mean, like kind of thing where
yeah,
it's like, because the modifieds were a support class at the time, but his stuff was as nice as any late model, stuff. So, and he always had a ton of motor, for the modifieds at a $350 claim rule. So,
yeah. And Wayne had a whole handful of good drivers. I mean, I remember one of them was from Texas with George White. George White was just one of those. He was one of those Ricky Thornton Juniors or Kyle Larson guys. He could drive anything. He was talented. He won races, and Wayne got along with. Wayne had a whole handful of good drivers. Wayne was Wayne was a legend in his own right. He was like you said, racing modified racing level, started building his own cars, and did a really good job. He was a good driver, and then his son Dane raced a little bit. I don't think it was Dane Larson's cup of tea, but Adam Larson raced a lot, and Adam won a lot of races at the Marshalltown Speedway, at Boone, Fairgrounds, Webster. on and on and on. Adam was a threat to be concerned about. He was very good. So, so
Yeah, we grew up at all those tracks.
yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of those Iowa tracks. It kind of comes up. I know Jimmy's got his Iowa Hawkeyes gear in, and Pat, you were pretty surprised. Like, why are you wearing that?
Are you a Hawkeye fan? Or you're from Western
my
Iowa,
my
so you're
my.
probably Iowa State.
Well, settle down. My oldest son is a true blue. I'll slit your neck. Hawkeye fan.
Okay.
He went to the University of Iowa. He went there and is making a difference in the computer world today. But my youngest son was an Iowa State, alumni, and
Okay.
so we got a little bit of everything in our family. My daughter from, she's a Kansas fan, so yeah,
Fun stuff.
Yeah, Jimmy's been an Iowa Hawkeyes fan since we were kids.
Yeah, that's like, I don't know. It's deep with me. So I don't know. It's just something with it that I just love. So
Yeah, it's pretty
yeah.
funny.
I just
Now you travel quite a bit. I mean, you've really built your business on visiting racetracks and just being there, being the guy that can be there. Tell us a little bit about how you built your business and the travel portion of it.
Well, I think a lot of it stems from when I became a sponsor of IMCA and they invited me to come to the Boone Speedway, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I said, gosh, what am I going to do? I need to take a support trailer, but I don't drive an hour and a half home and then drive an hour and a half up there, and because sometimes, I mean, we've raced till 3 and 4 in the morning at the Boone Speedway. I couldn't fathom doing that. I bought an old Itasca camper, and I hooked a trailer onto it and drove it up there. And back in the day when I started doing, I mean, I tasked a camper, hardly anything worked on it. The refrigerator didn't work on it, so I took it out and went to appliance store and bought a little refrigerator and stuffed it in that hole. And I learned that it was very important for me to be there as late as I could be. And one of my stories about Boone Speedway is I was talking to Dan Lee from California over the weekend, right before the Super Nationals were starting, and we let the modified practice on Monday night, and I talked to Dan Lee Saturday and Sunday about changing U joints and blah blah blah. And I get this call at 12 at night on my cell phone. Dan Lee, he's in panic mode. He said, Pat, I need your help. I need your help. I tried to change a U joint. I just keep messing it up. I goes, where are you at? He goes, well, I'm as far on the Speedway property as you close to the cornfield. So I hopped on my golf cart with a U joint and my tools and zipped out there and changed that U joint. And it just kind of taught me something that I think it's important to be there when they want you. I mean, whether it's working on the drive shaft or sitting in a lawn chair listening to their horror stories about drive shafts 3 in the morning, I'm here for them, and if somebody's beating on my motorhome door at 7 o'clock in the morning, because most racers, they wake up, they want the race car done, they don't have 4 in the afternoon, but this guy needs a dry shaft at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I think it's important for me to do that. So I built a couple of these trailers over my time to Kevin Gundecker's track at Tri-City and had a great time down there at the Modified Mania. And then I started traveling east of the Mississippi. I did 4 or 5 tour races, and I just found out that the relationships that you build doing that, staying at the racetrack in the lawn chair 2 or 3 in the morning, I think it was important. And I've been to Humboldt Speedway. I've been to the Wheatland Speedway at the Lucas Oil Speedway. I've been there since the inception of the place, and the closest motel to the racetrack is 40 miles. last thing I want to do is leave there at 1 o'clock in the morning, driving through the middle of nowhere, Missouri, where the deer are running across the highway. And I just, it's important for me to be there at the racetrack, and whether it be some clown. One night, I mean, even at Volusia, I've taken home to Volusia for the last 15 years, and that's where my relationship with Nick Hoffman started. That's where my relationship with Justin Allgaier started, and on and on and on. I mean, I've met so many great. I mean, I met Jackie Boggs. I mean, Jackie Boggs from that Volusia, and I became a good friend. And I can just tell stories after stories after stories. I mean, Ron Hornaday and I became good friends, down there at the Volusia Speedway, and Buzzy Ruderman. I mean, me and him were like father and son. I mean, we have such a time together, and we sat and chat about racing and old times. And one of the times I was down there, and I realized this is probably not a racing story that I shouldn't talk. I was sitting at my motorhome, and Junior Nolan from Two Brothers Motorsports from St. Clairsville, Ohio, him and I sat outside and chatted till about 2:30 in the morning. Or I got to go to bed. And I just got to sleep, and somebody's pounding on my motorhome door. So stupid me, I get up and I go answer, and it's Kenny Schrader. He swings the door open and he yells, "Everybody, he's awake!" And so him and Hornaday and their wives and Kenny Walsh, those clowns sat in my motorhome till 6:30 in the morning. They drank every ounce of I had, every ounce.
No.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So and Kenny Schrader will never let me live that down. I mean, I've got a couple other good stories about Schrader, but I think that's what's put me a step ahead of everybody. I mean, nobody else drags a drive shaft trailer around, the United States. It's, my wife used to ask me, "How much money did you make this weekend?" Not much. She goes, "Well, is it really worth going?" I goes, "Yeah, I think it's worth going because of the relationships." And from that time, she kept pushing me to go out, and she kept telling me, "You need to go out. You need to go out. You need to go out." And I mean, I traveled a lot of miles. I mean, I've been to South Dakota, Minnesota, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, Florida, Georgia. I mean, I've drug that trailer a lot of miles, and I think it's what made my company what it is today because of all the relationships that I've created. When somebody needed a U-joint change, okay, so it's a $20 deal, but I saved that guy that night, and he'll go home and he'll tell all of his friends that some guy from my came to me and got me, so a quick story about Justin Allgaier. Before UMP allowed carbon fiber, Justin Allgaier came to Volusia and went out laps, and then they had to take their car through tech, and Kelly, I can't spell his last name or say it, Kravosky or whatever his name is, his crew chief, walked over to my trailer and he goes, "I have a couple of 33-inch steel drive shafts, do you?" I goes, "Yeah, I got 4 of them with me." He goes, "You got what? 4 of them?" He goes, "Nobody runs a 33-inch drive shaft." I know. I said, "I plan for the weird." That's Justin Allgaier today has got a fast shafts, embroidered on the shoulder of his drive shaft suit, and and Mike Allgaier and the whole family from Hoosier Tire Midwest have become pretty good friends. So I think from that relationship of being at Volusia in my mind, I think it brought all that to us. So
Yeah, you're the guy with the gallon of water in the desert when it's
yeah,
a situation
yeah,
like that. It's not
yeah,
like you can run to Napa or Walmart and go pick up a drive shaft. I mean, that's just not something you
yeah,
can do.
yeah, yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
and like I said, in the early 2000s, when the economy started drying up, racers don't carry spare parts no more. They squeeze every bit of life out of what they have, and I think it's important for me to be the hero of this, and he'll go home to everybody that I saved him the first night so he could race the whole week. So
Mhm. Yeah,
uh,
and especially with online sales. now, being an option, like, oh, I know I can just get it tomorrow if I need it,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing. I'm sure that's affected. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah. If
that
it's
happens to
Monday,
the
if
parts.
it's Monday and you're close to your local parts house and you're going to get it, but if you're in Florida, there's not a lot of parts sales in Florida. I mean, you've got the place down in Lakeland, Florida, that does a good job, but it's still hard to beat what if they need to change a slip yoke, if they need a longer slip yoke, or if their U joints are bad. I mean, a lot of times I'll change U joints and not charge them for changing. I'll charge them for the car joint, but I won't charge them for the.
Yeah. And I see we have a couple more comments here. Shane's trying to stir the pot. He says, how about the Husker girls last night? Big Ten champions. Sorry, Iowa. So I don't know what team, what Husker. I mean, I know that's Nebraska, but I don't know what
Yeah.
sport.
That so I mean, I hate to laugh and denigrate one of our listeners, but like, we're at the end of football
Oh,
season.
volleyball.
We're in the middle of
It's
basketball
Oh,
season,
volleyball.
and we're talking about girls volleyball. I mean, that's okay. That's okay.
Who talks about girls volleyball
Hey,
during basketball? And
that's right. As
season?
a Husker fan, though, if you do beat Iowa this weekend, you're gonna get to go to the Potato Chip Bowl. I mean, but hey, that's a bit. That is huge for Nebraska because they haven't been to a bowl game in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 presidencies, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's okay. Iowa, we'll send you a postcard from Indy.
Yeah, exactly.
all right. A couple more here. Mitch says, been racing around Iowa for 43 years and the South. So that's cool.
That's
And
right.
Yeah.
Dirt's a little different, isn't
Aaron's
it?
laughing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Dirt's a lot different. Yeah. Mitch can tell us. And Randall's here, and he says, just passing by, wanted to share that I had the opportunity to visit MSR Racing last Friday. Very cool experience. I don't know who MSR. I'm not sure. I'm just
Not sure who that is.
Me neither.
There's a lot
Well,
of
tell us
names
who
out there.
MSR is. We might
Yeah.
have a story.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're here for. Lots of stories and fun and all that good stuff.
We're talking about stories. We got Pat on here, and Pat's a big supporter of the killer, Kyle Bronson.
Yeah. Kyle Bronson.
So
yeah.
I'm sure Kyle Bronson's never called you and said, I need to have a drive shaft tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or anything like that, I'd imagine, right?
I mean, I've sent him to Illinois. I've sent him to Tennessee.
Right.
I've sent him to Michigan. I've sent him to Georgia. I think I may have even sent one to Missouri for Kyle Bronson. Yeah,
how can he not be one of your favorite guys? I mean, just like
there's no question.
Kyle is awesome.
His car owner, Wayne Hammond, Bronson Ford.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what a great guy, and
Mr. Lean, awesome.
Yeah, I mean that's where my story starts with Bronson building drive shaft for Wayne. Him and his wife were driving these little 4-cylinder pinto cars, and I started building drive shafts for Wayne and become decent friends with him just over in the matter of and then it just grew from there. And Kyle's been a huge support. I mean, give away a lot of product. I'll throw Kyle a free drive shaft from time to time, but he never ceases to mention my name in the circle of a racetrack conversation when someone's having a drive shaft problem. Kyle's always mentioned my name, and he sent me a lot of customers. He's a different gentleman, but boy, he's a great guy. And I realize that he may have rubbed some people wrong along the line, but nature of the beast for racing. But yeah, Kyle's been a huge supporter of mine. I mean, I mean, if we had, I could go on and on and on about the Mike Harrisons
he's a man's man. That guy loves racing, hunting, bologna sandwiches.
Yeah.
Right?
Really is.
If we have a comment on that.
Yeah. He's a hard worker, and You know, he's the folks down at every time I go to Lucia, I Race Engineering has a little trade show down, a little open house thing at their facility during speed weeks, and they've invited me down for the last 5 years, and every year I'm down there. You know, Kyle Brown walking through race car engineering, shaking hands with everybody. I mean, he doesn't have to do that, but he does. So he's a really good guy.
He is. He is.
And if anybody's going to break Kyle Bronson, break it. So if my product holds up behind Kyle Bronson, that's a pretty good testimony.
That's for sure. You know, he's you know, he's still on the hammer, but I think he's settled down a little bit, like, which is good. I mean, but it's like, I mean, not like it was, you know, like it's bad or anything like that. But I mean, it's like, you know, it always seems like the guys who start off as being over aggressive and end up learning how to control that are the ones that end up making the best race car drivers. It's hard to go to somebody who is maybe more timid and then say, you need to start being more aggressive. You know, it always look at all the guys we got now that are running up front. They're all, you know, they all hammer the throttle and they've learned how to control that, you know.
I'm not sure Bobby Pierce has learned that yet.
But hey, he's winning races, wins a lot of races.
Yeah, there's something about it. Yeah, he's on the gas, you know. But when you say that, you know, I think about Earl Pearson Jr. and I remember back the day when Earl started racing, and he was a Kyle Bronson, but he's really
right
down, and he's learned to, you know, be a little quietly aggressive. So.
Right, you know when you gotta, you know, go when you need to go, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, and so we got some more comments here. So, Randall, the MSR Racing, to answer that question, is Meyer Shank Racing. Helio races for them.
Okay. All right.
Cool. And Shane says, back to the volleyball team, he says, we don't care about football or basketball. Happy Thanksgiving.
I wouldn't either if I was a Nebraska fan.
Yeah. He probably.
Don't be insulting the.
I'm not insulting.
I'm just saying, like, I would be scared of Cornhuskers fans. I'm just saying. Yeah.
Hey, I actually did watch their game the other night. I watched them play Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. I think they're big. I think they're big in swimming too. So maybe they got a pretty good swim. Huh?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that'd be. Yeah, we could maybe, I don't know, lacrosse, something like that.
Maybe. Yeah.
Water polo, they might be okay.
Yeah. There you go. There you go.
We should look them up. Google's a champ on that one.
I've got a lot of friends in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I tease them when they continue to lose at football. So
I will be going to Nebraska in February. So for the Race Logic Chassis School. Actually, I know you've been a supporter of that as well, and I work with Brian on those. So you know, it's just so funny when we start to talking and how many things kind of cross over, you know, from one to the next, you know, and you know, Bronson has come up in this conversation because you do drive shafts for him, and Pat and Jimmy, you do the wraps on his race car, and I know another one that would be very famous of your customers would be Jonathan Davenport. I'm sure you're awfully proud of some of his wins.
Yeah. The night he won $1 million, I called Jason Durham on the phone on his cell phone that night. You know, it was probably about close to 1:00 in the morning because I'm sure they were celebrating $1 million win. But I called Jason and he answered the phone and I goes, I want that drive shaft in my hands in 2 days. He goes, what? He goes, yeah, I want you to take the drive shaft out of the car, nothing to autograph it, and I want you to send it to me. So he did. I got it in 3 days, and we built a little box for it, a little box for it, and we got, you know, one of Jonathan's die cast in there, and we've got a picture of Jonathan winning, and we've actually got a picture of him signing the drive shaft. We took it back to down at Wheatland. The ladies that works for the company took the drive shaft down there and had her picture taken with him and him autographing the drive shaft again. Yeah, so the Davenport, it's pretty deep. It goes way back to Jared Landers. I became a really close friend with Jared Landers and worked very close with him in different projects. And one year we did some special things to Jared's car, and he went to Volusia in the modified. And I think out of the 7 nights racing at Volusia, he won 6 of them that year. And it's just a proven fact that if you concentrate on every little component of that race car from front to rear, and you give everything the same, you and of course Jared's a good driver. He's been a good driver in the modifieds and the late models, and he had an accident at Tri-City Speedway, and it kept him from racing. And I think that's where a lot of the roots of me and Lance Landers, come from. Lance is a very good supporter of our company, and it's going to continue that way. I mean, we've had a really good relationship. I mean, it kind of sells drive shafts when you're talking to someone you've never talked to before, and you can't seem to get anywhere with somebody trying to explain to them, well, my drive shaft's better than anybody else's. But then when I say, well, I sell drive shafts to Jonathan Davenport, oh, well, then I one, so a name like Jonathan Davenport goes a long way. And we have a lot of good
He's
friends.
pretty good.
And there's no question about it. And he's another one. If something's going to break, he's probably going to break it. And we've been very fortunate to have a good track record with him and that team. I don't think any failures that were pointed at our company, but we've had a couple failures, but it was kind of a self-inflicted situation. So
that happens. It's interesting. Steve Maynard is here, and he says Bronson is a great guy and will definitely test the limits on parts. And of course, Steve's at Earnhardt Technologies.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. So he was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago as a guest, and so of course, making the suspension components, and you're going to know that. Yeah, we all know who tests the parts out, right?
Yeah,
or who's going to stress them out.
We used to sell Bronson drive shafts, and back when the motors were 850 horsepower, and then as things pressing along, Bronson all my yokes, and so we've upgraded to a billet slip yoke for Bronson. And I've been building drive shafts for Brian Shirley, and Brian has always used the slip yoke too, and he broke. Bronson went over to him and said, you need to get off your cowboy tractor boy and buy the real good parts for that thing. You need a billet slip yoke. So we've built the slip yoke. Actually, we've created a new 9-inch slip yoke for a lot of the dirt modified teams, and a couple of the late model teams. They like it too. So it's a yoke, and it's been a really good.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. Of course, you're coming down for the Cars Racing Show in January. Last year was the first year at the show, I believe, and it this will be the second one.
Yeah, and I always like a good trade show. It just I went to Carolina Racing trade show a couple times down in that area, and it's just such a hodgepodge of racing. But I think as the crate late racing continues, I think that's a good place for me. I had a good time. I had lots of good conversation with lots of good people, and the fact that I shafts the Longhorn didn't hurt either, because they was right across the hall from me. So me and Troy Loomis had a good time. We always enjoy teasing each other. Tim from North Carolina, he's a good friend of mine, been a good customer of mine forever. We've done a lot of drive shafts for the asphalt modified world, the Wheeling modified guys, and stopped by. I think Tim's car was there, and so yeah, it's definitely worth going back to. It's a haul down there. We gotta box up all of our trade show stuff and send. I've got my box coming back from Syracuse, New York. I won't touch it. I'll just send it on to North Carolina. So
great.
So,
yeah.
And we're glad to have you.
Yes,
and
very
it's always good to rub elbows with Jim Bernheisel and Ben Baker from AFCO, and just so many other good support to have at that event. It's a good environment. It's good it's good to talk to. I think as your crate late model thing continues, the show's going to continue. I think it's just good for the area.
Great.
I think one thing I tell people is that if you were to go look at point stations or just pick a name of any of the late models, modifieds, the 4-cylinder, street stocks, whatever, and for the most part, if you were to pick a name and ask us if they're there, we'll probably show you on our attendee list that they're there. So
yeah.
You want to reach these guys in our region, which also extends all the way to the eastern side of the state, in Virginia, South Carolina. We get some East Tennessee stuff, North Georgia, and all that stuff. Those guys are coming. So it's one place to be able to see them at.
I got to meet Larry Pollard for the first time. I've been
LP gear.
I've been selling drive shafts to Larry now for quite a few years, and I've never met him in person. So I got to meet him at the show. I got to spend some time with Kyle Strickler, and it's always good visiting with him to see which way his life is headed. So yeah.
Did he even? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah. We've known Kyle for years.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
That's funny.
Kyle's great. Great. I see a question for me really quick here. Darren is asking if I'm videoing the hobby stock class. Yes, I am. So I am going to all 3 of the Race Logic classes this year. And I just got word that the IMCA class, one of those is I need to close it up as soon as this podcast is over. So I'm going to go do that. But there's a few spots left, I think, in the metric street stock and possibly the hobby stock class. So yeah, for anybody who's watching, wants to get a last minute spot on the in-person class. So yeah. Sorry, side note there. Little bit of a side note for anybody who's watching live, and and also just a note for anybody who's watching live, if you're even catching this on the tail end or whatever, then we also publish this as a podcast the following day, and you can find it on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, any of the places where you listen to podcasts, and just look up Racing Insiders Podcast. And it always helps if you leave us a review. So just my little plug right there for the podcast. Great. So I guess we're kind of coming up on time here. And Pat, tell us where people can find you or Fast Shafts, or maybe where you're going to be next.
Well, I try to brag about my customers on Facebook, so I'm not very hard on Facebook. Easy. It's my cell phone. It is out there in many places. It's probably not a good thing to tell everybody what it is on here. I'm not hard to find. If you know Kyle Bronson, call Kyle Bronson. He'll tell you how to get in touch with me, or call Davenport or Brian Shirley, or they can get. We do have a website, driveshafts.com. I have a personal Facebook account at Pat Fagen. Then Fast Shaft Facebook. But that's about all I do. I'm not really a tech savvy guy, and I got my hands full just doing that. So we've got an 800 number. It's 800-661. You can reach us. I'm usually there at 7:00 in the morning until 5:30 at night every day. So it's not hard to find me. You can usually find me on Facebook. I try to answer Facebook questions as quick as I can, because, like I said, people don't call me because they like me. People call me because they need help. I'm usually the guy.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and big shout out to you, Jimmy. I'm so glad that you're joining me as a co-host on here. So
that's fun, especially when you have interesting people like Pat.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
I agree.
How can I disagree with a guy that's wearing a Hawkeye sweatshirt?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
There we go. So
interestingly enough, I bowl on Tuesday nights on League. That's pretty much my I don't race anymore, so I bowl. But every week I go there. There's a guy that's a big Ohio State fan. So he's every week is Ohio State, and we have another guy that's a Michigan fan. So and even though we're in North Carolina, we have the 3 Big Ten teams that we're sure. And we get along really well. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
if you could hang on for just a minute, Pat, I'm going to wrap things up and just go ahead and stay online. But I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening. And we
You
will
bet.
not have a show next Monday. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back the following Monday with a new show. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.